What if I told you that some of Hollywood's most iconic men, those smooth, charming legends from the Golden Age, were hiding a secret so strange it could make even the most glamorous star blush? Behind the perfectly lit sets, the dazzling smiles, and the iconic roles were hairlines that had been stitched, plugged, and transplanted into something that looked more doll factory than dashing. Before hair restoration became a science, it was an experiment, and some of Hollywood's biggest names were the test subjects. Today, we're peeling back the curtain on Golden Age stars with the worst hair transplants, a parade of botched procedures, secret wigs, and scars hidden under the spotlight. But before we begin, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. You might just win a rare DVD box set of classic Hollywood films featuring some of the very stars in this story. Now, let's dive into the tangled tale of fame, vanity, and follicular misfortune. That if this kind of story touches your heart, if you're someone who cares about truth, responsibility, and speaking up for the voiceless, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and share it with someone who should hear it. Let's get started. 10. Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the Bad Hair Board. Frank Sinatra wasn't just a voice that defined an era, he was also one of Hollywood's earliest cosmetic surgery pioneers. In the 1960s, when hair transplants were still in their infancy, Sinatra decided to try a procedure that promised to restore his youthful hairline. Unfortunately, the results were anything but smooth. Surgeons removed small circular sections of hair-bearing scalp from the back of his head and inserted them on top, creating the first version of what we'd now call hair plugs. The outcome? Little islands of hair sprouting like crops on a too perfectly tilled field. Close-up photos from that time revealed what fans weren't supposed to see: a doll hair pattern where the transplanted tufts grew in stiff, unnatural clusters. Worse, the new hair didn't even match his natural texture. It curled differently and grew at odd angles. To hide the mismatch, Sinatra relied on heavy pomade, slicked-back styles, and careful lighting during performances. But during a 1965 TV special, hot studio lights melted his styling products, and the plug pattern began to shine through. Makeup artists scrambled between takes to patch up the disaster. Sinatra may have been the chairman of the board, but when it came to hair, he was chairman of bad timing. 9. Burt Reynolds, the Bandit's rug revelation. Few actors embodied masculine confidence like Burt Reynolds. His grin, his swagger, his mustache, all Hollywood gold. But his relationship with his hair was far from golden. In the early 1970s, Reynolds underwent several transplant procedures that left him with an unnaturally straight, overly dense hairline. Critics joked that his forehead looked drawn on, and the press whispered that his once natural charm had turned synthetic. The problem wasn't just the bad surgery, it was the obsession that followed. Reynolds spent decades trying to fix the original procedure, undergoing multiple corrective operations that only made things worse. The scars became more visible, the follicles more damaged, and the result more artificial. Ironically, Reynolds' rugged appeal never needed a perfect hairline. His charisma could have carried him through baldness with ease. Yet, in chasing youthful perfection, he became a tragic example of how Hollywood's pressure for eternal youth can trap even the most confident stars. 8. Sammy Davis Jr., the Rat Pack's hair disaster. When you think of Sammy Davis Jr., you think of effortless charm and unmatched showmanship. But the man who dazzled audiences under bright stage lights found himself battling a private hair horror. His transplant in the late 1960s was a disaster, creating a dense, blocky hairline that looked more like a wig than natural growth. Under nightclub lighting, the thick plugs cast tiny shadows on his forehead, exposing the surgery's unnatural grid-like pattern. Sammy tried everything to hide it: pompadours, thick hair products, even adding extensions. Yet, every trick only worsened the damage, making his natural hair weaker over time. Friends later revealed that Davis often refused certain close-up shots during performances, fearing that his transplant scars would show. For a man who lived for the spotlight, the insecurity was crushing. His story became one of Hollywood's earliest lessons that beauty, under the glare of fame, can quickly become a burden. 7. William Shatner, the captain's cosmic hair catastrophe. Long before Star Trek made him a pop culture legend, William Shatner began his battle with the baldness frontier. His early transplant attempts in the late 1960s left him with tightly packed plugs that created a thick, unnatural hairline. Instead of receding gracefully, his hair seemed to defy gravity and age, stubbornly stuck in time while the rest of him matured. Fans noticed. So did critics. For years, Shatner became the subject of speculation, jokes, and whispered curiosity about what was on his head. The surgery had created what looked like a permanent helmet of hair impossible to shave or remove because of the scarring. Ironically, that same hairline became part of his iconic image. Whether intentionally or not, Shatner's unchanging hair symbolized the eternal, slightly offbeat heroism of Captain Kirk. But behind the charm was a man who had paid a steep price for experimenting with technology decades ahead of its time. 6. Tony Curtis. Some like it transplanted. Tony Curtis was every bit the Hollywood heartthrob, smooth, polished, and impossibly stylish. But beneath that sleek exterior was a scalp that had seen more surgery than most people see movie sets. Starting in the 1960s, Curtis underwent a series of aggressive transplant procedures that left him with straight, geometric rows of hair plugs across his head. Makeup artists on film sets reportedly dreaded close-up shots, spending hours trying to soften the hard lines of his artificial growth. As he aged, the problems multiplied. His transplanted hair stayed dark and thick, while his natural hair thinned and grayed, creating a jarring two-tone effect. Desperate to fix it, Curtis kept going under the knife, each time hoping for redemption, each time making the situation worse. By his later years, his scalp bore a patchwork of scars and grafts. For all his charisma, his pursuit of perfection became a silent obsession, illustrating the painful cost of vanity in an industry built on illusion. 5. Mel Gibson, the Road Warrior's hair highway. Though Mel Gibson rose to fame after Hollywood's golden age, his transplant troubles carried on the same legacy of bad techniques. His procedure left him with an unnaturally low and dense hairline, what surgeons call the forest fire effect, where patches of thick growth sit beside bald zones. On camera, the inconsistencies were hard to miss. Directors and cinematographers began adjusting lights and camera angles to disguise the problem. Ironically, Gibson's natural hairline, slightly receding with age, would have given him the rugged maturity that matched his later roles. Instead, his artificial restoration made him look oddly preserved, a man caught between youth and experience. His story shows how even advanced actors of the modern era could fall victim to outdated methods and the haunting pressure to look eternally marketable. 4. John Travolta, the disco hair disaster. John Travolta's hair was once as famous as his dance moves. In Saturday Night Fever and Grease, his thick mane symbolized youthful rebellion and confidence. But by the 1980s, as his natural hair began thinning, Travolta turned to early transplant technology. The result looked painted on. His hairline became too straight, too perfect, devoid of the small irregularities that make real hairlines believable. As HD cameras arrived in the 1990s, every flaw became magnified. Fans and tabloids mocked his changing hairline, and speculation about wigs and surgeries followed him for years. Travolta's case perfectly captured Hollywood's cruel paradox. The audience demanded eternal youth, yet mocked those who tried too hard to achieve it. Over time, he leaned into self-awareness and confidence, eventually owning his bald look, but only after decades of anxiety and public scrutiny. 3. Elton John, the Rocket Man's hair, didn't take flight. Elton John's musical brilliance always overshadowed his appearance, but in the 1970s, his attempt at hair restoration nearly grounded his self-confidence. His early transplants used the crude punch graft technique, leaving him with scattered tufts that looked like crop circles. The patches grew unevenly, with strands pointing in different directions, making styling impossible. After multiple failed surgeries, Elton gave up, and that decision changed everything. Instead of hiding behind shame, He reinvented his look with flamboyant wigs and creative hairpieces that became part of his signature identity. The very disaster that once humiliated him became a launching pad for his most liberated, theatrical self. In his case, the failure wasn't just cosmetic, it was transformational, proving that sometimes embracing artifice can lead to authenticity. 2. Sean Connery, Bond's hair, didn't have a license to kill. Few men have redefined masculinity like Sean Connery. But even 007 wasn't immune to insecurity. His early hair transplant attempts in the 1970s were so disastrous that he soon abandoned them entirely. The plug technique left him with circular patches that didn't match his natural hair color or texture, producing a checkerboard effect that makeup artists struggled to conceal. The irony? Connery looked far better bald. Once he embraced it, his image shifted from vain to virile, proving that confidence is the real key to allure. His decision to shave it all off-challenged Hollywood's beauty standards and paved the way for bald icons like Bruce Willis and Patrick Stewart. Connery's failed transplant turned out to be one of the best career decisions he never planned. 1. Marlon Brando. The Godfather's hair offer you can refuse. Marlon Brando's legend is larger than life, but his hair transplant saga is one he tried to bury. In the 1970s, desperate to preserve his matinee idol image, Brando underwent several experimental surgeries that left his scalp scarred and misshapen. The transplanted hair grew in odd directions, some straight up, others sideways, and the density was inconsistent, making his head resemble uneven grass sprouting through cracked pavement. The humiliation was profound. Brando began wearing wigs, hats, and scarves, refusing to be photographed without them. The tragedy wasn't vanity, it was that his natural baldness would have suited his later roles perfectly. As an aging patriarch or a weathered hero, his presence would have been even more powerful. But the scars of failed cosmetic science forced him into an exhausting performance, one not on camera but in daily life. The technology that failed them. All these stories share one culprit: primitive transplant technology. The 1960s and 1970s relied on a method called punch grafting, where 4mm plugs of scalp were moved from the back of the head to the front. Surgeons didn't yet understand the artistry of natural hair growth, the subtle variations in direction, density, and angle that make real hairlines believable. The result was a doll's head effect, thick circular clumps surrounded by bare skin. The procedure also caused scarring, both physical and emotional. Donor sites were left with dotted marks like a checkerboard, while the grafted areas often healed unevenly, leaving raised bumps. Few of the doctors performing these operations specialized in aesthetic restoration. Many were general surgeons chasing celebrity clientele. For stars who lived and died by their image, the results were catastrophic.